Today I have 3 stories that I want to tell you. The first being about the Files store. I don't speak German. My friend, she's a German major, German minor. She explained it to me, showed me a voice recording. I tried it like 10 times. I gave up. But Fellstorka, which I'll put on the screen here, translates to arrow stork and is the term for 25 subjects, the first of which appeared in 1822 in Mecklenburg, Germany. It is a white stork, which, as you can see, is an arrow jammed through its neck. It was the first piece of evidence found by European scientists of the migratory patterns of birds native to Europe or found in Europe and how they migrated to Africa, because the spear was found to be of African design. This last Thanksgiving, my family and I, we went up north to go visit some of our extended family and had a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner. After Thanksgiving, my cousin, who's 16, and myself, who's 20, laid on the floor and began watching Instagram Reels together. It was a wonderful bonding exercise, and eventually, after a couple scrolls, we find a Vril edit or an Agartha edit. It was a short reel that probably looked something like this.
I met a strange lady, she made me nervous. She took me in and gave me breakfast. She said, you come from a land down under.
Even if the sky is falling down, I know that we'll be safe and sound.
The last story I have for you is that on November 7th, 2025, a bomb went off in a mosque during Friday prayer in Jakarta, Indonesia, the nation's capital. The mosque was a part of a high school complex, and over 50 students were injured. Indonesian police have arrested a suspect who was found with 2, quote, firearm-shaped objects on their person. On the body of the firearms, there were several inscriptions. There was Breton Tarrant, Welcome to Hell, 14 words, and 4 Agartha. If you're familiar with American far-right movements, white supremacist movements, white identitarian movements, you're probably familiar with the 14 words drawn from a terrorist in the 1980s and his personal slogans regarding the white race. Welcome to Hell appears to be a reference to the Columbine shooters, one of them at least. The third, Breton Tarrant, is the name of the man who perpetrated the 2019 New Zealand Christchurch mosque shootings, where he killed tens of people. And for Agartha is a reference to Agartha, which is a mythical kingdom in the center of the earth that held the Aryan race before they emerged and began to spread. It is also the subject of the Instagram Reels my cousin and I saw on Thanksgiving Day. Vril edits are an example of these daily doses of white supremacist, racist propaganda that is omnipresent across the internet for large swaths of people, particularly young men. And why is it that that's so, right? My cousin and I'm fairly progressive, my cousin does not care, like I said. But why are we seeing this? Why are we seeing propaganda that is connected to the white replacement theory, to white supremacist movements across the United States, to Western chauvinism, to all of these very, very hate-fueled, violent movements? Why are we seeing so much of it? Why are we so familiar with it when our fathers from the 80s and the 90s, when they were our same age, could not have identified the equivalents of that time with such ease, nor would they see them in their daily life? Well, there's the obvious answer. We live in the information age. It's everywhere. My phone is in my pocket at all times. However, there is something deeper. And to see what that is and why it's important that we understand what's happening, we'll first have to look at what is this? What is what I'm calling the right-wing media ecosystem, the history of American conservatism, and its use of the media and the origins of that whole framework. Who is a part of this modern right-wing movement that can tie people like Joe Rogan, podcaster, to American neo-Nazis like Nick Fuentes. And finally, why is this important? Why should we care that young people are seeing these Vril edits and treating them as a joke? What is it that I mean when I say the right-wing media ecosystem? Well, per the book Network Propaganda, the right-wing media ecosystem is a collection of non-mainstream right-wing sources that oftentimes buck journalistic norms for the sake of storytelling, for selling an agenda, that kind of thing. And so something like the Wall Street Journal, which is conservative-leaning, is not a part of this network, of this ecosystem, because it still fact checks. It has to be. It is a report for the business class. A perfect example of a very prominent member of the right-wing media ecosystem is Fox News. They will lie often, and they don't care. It's about selling a story. Network Propaganda goes on to explicitly define this, saying that those that, quote, exhibit all the characteristics of an echo chamber that radicalizes its inhabitants, destabilizes their ability to tell truth from fiction, and undermines their confidence in institutions, end quotes, are members of this ecosystem. And now, well, they admit there are systems that could occur on the left. The right is unique in the vast shape of its ecosystem and all of the different biota that inhabit it. An example of this is from the study from Media Matters, in which they looked at 320 podcast shows across a variety of social media platforms. Of those 320 surveyed, 191 were right-wing shows, while 129 were left-wing. Now that's an obvious right-wing bias, but it's not that much. They're still roughly, and that's doing a lot of heavy lifting, roughly even. But the important thing is not only look at just the number of unique shows, but also their engagement. Of the top 10 shows, 1 was left-wing. The other 9 were right-wing leaning. Shows like the Joe Rogan Experience last weekend with Theo Vaughn, the Impulsive Podcast with Logan Paul. It was only Trevor Noah's show, What Now with Trevor Noah, that was left-wing. And even then, it wasn't in the top of those top 10 rankings. 72% of those shows that were surveyed, of the 320, were found to be right-leaning by Media Matters, with a third of those labeled right-wing having been labeled by the podcast creators as apolitical or not having a specific politics for whatever reason. And now you might be saying, wow, Blake, you're such a woke liberal. Why are you complaining about this? They just are better at business. They're more popular, X, Y, Z, right? Any excuse. The reason it's important is because people are assuming, trusting that these podcasts are apolitical sources of news. Yet, vast swaths of them, who even market themselves as apolitical, are not. 31% of Americans trust, according to Pew Research in 2023, podcasts more than any other form of news media, with somewhere in the ballpark of 87% of people trusting them more than traditional news sources in general. And so that means there is a large portion of the population who looks at these podcasts who do have a political bias and say, this must be the neutral take. This is just the facts. And they are then carrying those biases encoded with the information they were getting into their day-to-day life, into their civic life, into their political life, into their family life. And those effects stack up. The right has a long history with popular mass media. Well, the left is often called the people's group, is the choice for the working class. One historian argues that the right is the ones who truly understand popular media. This historian, Joseph Franzak, in his 2018 paper, The Fascist Game, Transnational Political Transmission and the Genesis of the U.S. Modern Right, argues that the modern American conservative movement draws its heredity from fascist and conservative movements in the U.S. that emerged and were inspired by the Euro-fascist movements of the mid-1920s to 1940s, aka Mussolini, the Mustache Man, Francisco Franco, and all these other groups. Franczak cites Gerald Maguire, this Wall Street broker, as one of the major contributors to this combination of popular mobilization and corporate capital within the U.S. conservative movement. Maguire was a man recruited by Wall Street elites to try and get General Smedley Butler, a World War I hero, to try and lead a march on Washington, a beer hall putsch, basically, to create an office above the president that would be a dictatorship that was backed by Wall Street that Smedley Butler held, that would then be able to control and rein in and get rid of FDR's New Deal and his entire administration. Smedley Butler said, hell no, that's fascistic, I will have no part in that, you guys are trying to take over the United States, ruin our country, and went public with it. However, Maguire's thoughts, according to Franczak, still hold significant sway in the United States conservative movement. In fact, he says that the way that fascistic ideals throughout the 20th century spread holds a great deal of influence over how conservative ideals will spread now, saying, quote, newsprint, film, and radio, mass media connecting the world and distributing popular political practice on a mass scale. Any syndicated photograph of a Nazi or fascist rally was, in receptive hands, a how-to guide to fascist performivity. In short, fascists were easily mobilized and communicated easily. Fascist movements around the world inspired all sorts of violence against capital O others. Communists, trade unionists, liberals, ethnic minorities, racial minorities, all these scary things, right? It was to a point where in the 30s, in Detroit, for example, there was the Black Legion, which was this hate group that would attack not only ethnic minorities in Detroit, but also trade unionists and activists for the Congress of Industrial Organizations, what's now the AFL-CIO. They would eventually transform over the decades into law and order, trying to preserve the peace and coupling this corporate capital with popular movements from the white working and middle classes. In short, Franczak argues that modern conservative movements finds the means of distributing their ideology as well as portions of their rhetoric in earlier fascistic movements in the United States and around the world, and culminated in the grand transatlantic fascistic exchange of the early 20th century. It is this law and order rhetoric that moves us on to our next point, where we get B-list celebrity and Governor of California Ronald Reagan sweeping elections and becoming most well known for the reason why every graph of US progress starts to look bad starting in the 1980s. Looking past all the other things that Ronald Reagan has done that, in my opinion, made our country worse, I want to talk about the repealing of the Fairness Doctrine. So the FCC used to have this policy where basically, in short, broadcasters had to give coverage of important local issues and give balanced coverage of those issues. Reagan repealed that, his FCC repealed that, and said, you know what, it's free game now, you could do whatever you want. And now this is tied directly to the rise of stations like Fox News, stations that trade in misinformation. And now this piece of legislation, or this regulation, was only for broadcasters. There's no way to know how it would have interacted with the internet, right? Al Gore didn't invent that until the 2000s. However, we would still be able to have this culture around saying, yes, we should regulate these kind of things. There's obvious a necessity to do these things, to say, no, you can't say X, yes, you have to cover everything, and not be able to be so flippant of the rules. There wouldn't be this mixture of news and entertainment in the same way we have today. And, well, there are ways we could reinforce, make a new fairness doctrine. However, in my opinion, that boat has already sailed. And it is because of people like Ronald Reagan that they created this environment that we now live in, where me and my cousin are getting Nazi propaganda fed to us by one of the largest tech companies in the US. Moving now from the 80s to, well, up until I was born, let's talk about Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh was basically a kingmaker for the Republican Party from when he started airing shows in the late 80s and early 90s and received notoriety, and his death in 2021. Rush Limbaugh's influence was being felt in the Clinton and Bush Sr. administrations in particular, 46% of Republican congressional staffers in the Clinton administration said that they were informed most by healthcare or on healthcare policy by Rush Limbaugh. By 1992, Ronald Reagan would call him the voice of conservatism. And so that's Mr. American conservatism right there, basically passing his crown on. But Rush Limbaugh was not only a conservative kingmaker, he also has quite a lot in common with some folks we'll talk about later. But during the Clinton administration, in 1995, there was the Oklahoma City bombing, where a bunch of people died. It was a fairly important terror attack. And Bill Clinton and many liberals would blame Rush Limbaugh's rhetoric on why this attack happened, saying you're anti-government, your conspiracy theories, all of these things that you push caused this. This is your fault. You are in some way accountable for this violence. And that was the first arrow in the neck of us. Going into the 2000 election after Bill Clinton, we find that Rush Limbaugh was being courted by Republicans actively. Bush the Younger would actively seek out his endorsement, his ideas on policy. And when the Trump campaign won him over in 2016, after initial concern about Trump not being the same type of conservative as Limbaugh, Trump and Limbaugh would form a close partnership and friendship, with him even receiving the Presidential Medal of Honor from President Trump during his first administration. Moving from Limbaugh, I want to talk about something that's a little bit more recent, something I remember. Well, you know the Chicago bombing. I talked about that in the beginning, right? So Brenton Tarrant was mentioned on the guns. He was the Christchurch shooter. March 15th, 2019, he shot and killed 51 people across 2 mosques in New Zealand. He live streamed this entire rampage on Facebook, and before his attacks, which lasted only 36 minutes, posted on what is now 8kun, formerly 8chan, which is an anonymous posting board. It's very similar to 4chan, if you've heard of it, and said, quote, "Well, lads, it's time to stop shitposting and time to make a real-life effort post. I will carry out an attack against the invaders and will even live stream the attack via Facebook." And so he did. His 70-some page manifesto was laden with internet references. He said that Spyro, Year of the Dragon, taught him ethno-nationalism, that Fortnite trained him to be a killer, and said he was going to floss on the corpses of his enemies. While live streaming, Tarrant, before getting out of his car, let's say, probably the thing that I remember the attack most for, if you'll forgive me, I was 14 at the time and didn't have my priorities straight, he said, "Remember, lads, subscribe to PewDiePie." If you don't know who PewDiePie is, that phrase sounds like nonsense. Kind of is. Subscribe to PewDiePie. What does that mean? Is he talking about the My Little Pony guy? No. PewDiePie, or known by his real name Felix Arvid Ulf Kjellberg, very Swedish, he is, was and is a gaming YouTuber that was incredibly popular in 2019 and was a part of this massive social media campaign to try and get him to reach more subscribers, or the highest amount of subscribers ever achieved in YouTube's history, as opposed to this Indian channel that was ran as a corporation called T-Series. I remember this. I was a part of this. I subscribed to PewDiePie at that time. People like Mr. Beast, who's now a YouTube darling, has an Amazon Prime show. One of the main ways he garnered this popularity was via subscribe to PewDiePie News. Around the time of the shooting and before, in 2017, PewDiePie was catching flack for anti-Semitism. He posted a video where he bought different things from Fiverr, which is like a digital gig site where you hire an actor to talk into a camera. It reminds me of a lot of like Cameo, but it was more like also TaskRabbit, like you could pay somebody to edit a video for you and that kind of thing. And it was like a popular form of content at the time. And I'll show you the clip in a second, but he basically paid these kids to say a very hateful thing and dance about it, and he posted that to his YouTube, fully knowing the reaction, and then suffered the consequences.
I like the editing.
Subscribe to Keemstar.
After that video was published, he received a lot of flack. He was dropped from Disney's Makers program So he lost a lot of money. He was running a show as a YouTuber, as an independent creator who streamed himself yelling at games for fun online, partnered with Disney to make a show. He then started to receive a lot of think pieces about how he is becoming this vehicle for the alt-right. And that was laughed off a lot at the time. I thought it was ridiculous. I was a lot more conservative than I am now. And my little 14-year-old brain said, how? It's just free speech. He's just being funny. He's just a silly little guy. I was wrong. PewDiePie was another arrow in the neck of another stork. He was another sign that this violence was coming from somewhere. And now, while I'm not saying PewDiePie caused the Christchurch shooting, Lord no. He was mostly brought in probably as a means of gaining publicity for the Christchurch shooter from Tarrant, and didn't directly inspire any actions. However, his association with the event, this other alt-right messaging, and his own flirtation with the ideology, at least with being edgy and politically incorrect, anti-woke now, right? He brought people closer to the edge, especially his young audience. I was 14 at the time. My friends were all 14, 15. We were all immersed in this like youth, young white, alternate right culture, kind of. We were all like trying to be non-PC. That was cool. I'm from rural Montana. That's how it was. In short, there is a direct line from PewDiePie, his racist remarks, or his anti-Semitic remarks, and the modern white supremacist Vril edits that I see on Instagram. They're part of the same story. They're chapters in the book. But now allow me to draw a bit of a better picture of what this looks like. In the modern day, in year of our Lord 2025, the equivalent to PewDiePie would be something like Last Weekend with Theo Von, or the Joe Rogan Experience, right? Comedy shows, I've enjoyed some of them. Like, I have listened to or watched Theo Von's podcast on a couple of occasions. He interviewed the Rizzler. How could I not?
I want to blow out that candle so bad.
You do? Yeah. All right, how about this? You answer this next question, I'll let you blow it out.
Okay.
What's one of your biggest fears about the 4th grade coming up? Something that that's, got you maybe a little bit nervous.
I don't know. I'm not very nervous on that shit.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, deal.
Yes.
Joe Rogan holds a lot of sway over his viewers. And he's not explicitly right-wing. He's certainly leaning towards it. But he's not coming out here and saying, vote for Trump. Except that he is. He endorsed Trump in the 2024 election. That's why that Media Matters article talked about this being the podcast election. Because people like Joe Rogan, the man who is the biggest podcast in the world, said, you, my loyal audience, you should vote for this guy. I like this guy more. This was a switcher from 2016 where he endorsed Bernie Sanders. But still, he had and has a major influence. And not only that, not only does he just bring Trump on and interview him, but he also brings on people like Elon Musk, who ran Trump's Doge department, who directly is responsible in part for Trump getting elected. He's also interviewed Peter Thiel, the CEO of Palantir, who is not as overt in his interactions with the Trump administration and conservative politics. However, he is a massive funder of J.D. Vance, the vice president, has several people that working in the administration who are allies towards him, and he also has gone on the right-wing speaking tour talking about the Antichrist. All of these people, Trump, Musk, Thiel, I don't know how to say his name actually, all of them could be listened to completely neutrally. I could just be curious. However, their metadata, the fact that Musk was in this video and I watched it for like 3 hours, Thiel was in this video, I watched it for 4, from Joe Rogan, that feeds into my algorithm. I start seeing more interviews with Musk, more Trump-related clips. I start seeing talking heads talking about Trump. I see a PragerU video about wokeness going too far. I see a Daily Wire clip from Ben Shapiro talking about how the woke has put too many trans people in the bathrooms. I see a Matt Walsh video, a self-proclaimed theocratic fascist, but just on the libs. Side note, that's called plausible deniability, and that's something we're going to talk about in a second. But these people come on, they talk and they talk and they blabber, but they're pushing you further to the right, and you begin to consume more and more of that content as it's spoon-fed you by these algorithms. And so now you move from like a centrist, maybe a bit curious about right-wing politics, find it interesting, or these people at least interesting, to somebody who is solidly consuming explicitly right-wing media. PragerU, Daily Wire are conservative non-profit and profit-seeking corporations. That's what they do. They are conservative ideologues, basically. They're conservative organizing machines. And now you go from being this vaguely conservative person to being actively participating in conservative politics. Well, now you get more and more stuff in your feed. Maybe if you're a college student like me, you join your Turning Point chapter, right? You begin to interact with local Republican politics. And maybe you stop there. But then a small fraction of that group of people who've gone down this pipeline thus far begin to see Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, these more radical figures within the right-wing movement who are somewhat pariah. And then you start seeing this guy, Nick Fuentes, and his show America First. And you see like funny clips of him, like talking about the Minions.
Minions 2, The Rise of Gru.
We the best music.
Banana! Hello.
DJ Khaled.
And then you're like, why don't I check this out? He's a funny guy. You start seeing him pop up on Instagram, same thing. And more things begin to feed into your feed. You start watching America First, and not on that, Nick Fuentes doesn't just talk about how he loves the Minions. He talks about how you, white man, are being replaced. How somebody with the little hats is controlling you. How you are being oppressed. How you are being attacked and destroyed, and how you need to oppose the woke, liberal mind virus, basically. I'm mixing rhetoric, but you understand the idea. And at the same time as you get Nick Fuentes clips, Instagram, thanks to deregulation pushed by the Trump administration, begins to show you reels from less professional environments. You start seeing the Vril edits and the Agartha edits, but this time you're not being introduced to it as, oh, look at this kind of funny, insane conspiracy theory thing, like the way we'd laugh at Alex Jones. No. This is something speaking to you. This is not meant to be taken entirely literally, but there is an element of truth to it for you. And then you start seeing accounts like this pop up. Uncle's Pest Control is an account with less than 10,000 followers on Instagram. However, this is why accounts like these are important. This is based out of Montana. There are videos in here talking about representatives in my hometown, representatives in the place I go to university at, that I have met before, that I've spoken to, that I have had like a lunch with, that kind of thing. There are people liking these, that are people I have in my classes, who are liking things saying, we need to get rid of all the immigrants. That the Jews are forcing abortions on the Goyim. These insane things, these anti-Semitic, these racist, these white nationalist things. The profile picture itself, that's an Iron Cross. That is a symbol that was originally used in the Kaiserreich in Imperial Germany, that got then used by Nazi Germany as a symbol of their movement, of their warrior culture. This is a Nazi account that is telling people to join nationalist, white supremacist organizations in my home state. And now do you see the problem? Quote Logan Paul, I don't mean to be a woke asshole, but there is some people who fall down this pipeline. And now, as to why it's important, we have to look at violence. Remember Matt Walsh and his theocratic fascism to own the libs and plausible deniability? Well, we're seeing that cause violence, or at least allow actors to say you should go do violence and then get away scot-free. Stochastic terrorism is a unique threat that we've begun to see pop up more and more. The Max Planck Institute says that the use of mass media to provoke random acts of ideologically motivated violence that are statistically predictable but individually unpredictable is stochastic terrorism. So what that means is it's like in Zoolander, right? The kill the Prime Minister of Malaysia, right? That is a direct call for violence. You could pretty clearly in a court of law say, hey, you tried to make him kill the Prime Minister of Malaysia. However, if someone like Nick Fuentes goes on a show and saying that Prime Minister of Malaysia is replacing your race, he is trying to kill you, and then somebody goes and blows up the Prime Minister of Malaysia, that's stochastic terrorism. We know by December 31st, when that ball dropped in Times Square, there is going to be terrorism. There's going to be some violence that is going to have happened somewhere in this country. We just don't know who it's going to be, who it's going to be against, and who caused it. But what we do know is there's a very obvious relation between rhetoric from people like Nick Fuentes, like Uncle Pest Control, that causes this violence. There's a common claim amongst right-wing circles, the late Charlie Kirk made this, is that terrorism is a left-wing issue. It's the leftists that are killing people. But the Center for Strategic and International Studies shows that to be untrue. From 2016 to 2025, right-wing terrorists kill on average 0.3 people more than left-wing terrorists and plots for terror. So that's 0.7 people per attack for right-wing terrorists and 0.4 for left-wing terrorists. And as you look at this graph, you can see from when data started in the 90s to the modern day, right-wing terrorism has outnumbered left-wing terrorism every single year by a country mile. The Center for Strategic and International Studies excludes ethno-nationalist and jihadist terrorism as a part of this statistic, which I don't think is fair. Ethno-nationalist is typically right-wing. White supremacy is an ethno-nationalist movement, and jihadism is a result of conservative radical Islam, both of which are right-wing movements. So every single year, up until 2025, right-wing violence has outnumbered left-wing violence by a massive margin. And even then, this number is only coming from June for this year. So that means that there is not data on how much terror has happened this year. What we do know is that Trump has been very dismissive of right-wing terrorism and that it's likely gone underreported. In short, left-wing violence is a spit in the bucket of right-wing terror. Bringing this back all around, straight to the beginning, we pretend that we have no idea where this violence is coming from. It's a new tragedy. We talk about terrorism. There's kind of in the same way we talk about school shootings. Who could have seen this? Putting guns in the hands of mentally ill children, mentally ill people without proper social safety nets results in violence. Who could have foreseen this? And we say the same thing, but these racially hatred-based attacks, saying that this group is trying to kill you, that they're subhuman, that you need to protect your race, causes violence? How could we have foreseen this? We have the stork with the arrow in its neck. We've had it thousands of times over. Yet we refuse to do anything about it. We say it's all free, it's all fair in love and war. Yet we refuse to acknowledge that there are actors, there are malevolent actors who are causing direct, measurable harms. The Jakarta bomber would likely have never done what he did if our history, our exportation of hatred-based ideology, more so, would never have happened. Then 50 or more high schoolers in Jakarta would not have been harmed. Those Muslims praying in their mosque in Christchurch would not have been harmed. Hundreds of thousands of people. But we don't. Because we say, look, right-wing media ecosystem. We understand you there. We see all your biota. However, we refuse to understand that it is an interconnected web. We pretend that each instance is its own shocking burst, the sudden burst of violence that came from nowhere, and ignore the fact that there is a cause and there is a result. We need to do something. I don't know what it is. I understand reasons why things like the Fairness Doctrine were repealed. I don't discount the First Amendment. I don't discount freedom of speech. However, I do not want those rights to be coated in the blood of innocent people who are living their lives until a madman decided that he'd heard enough and decided to take action, to make a real-life effort post. So yeah, I don't have anything to leave you guys off with. Good luck.